So as Paulina mentioned, and I said a little bit as well, I work both at Malmö University and at Åbo Akademin. Malmö since September, Åbo for a longer time, maybe since 2019 about. And but the thing is, I come from Brazil, and in Brazil, we have this very strong saying that education can actually like change lives. And the fact that I'm here talking to you in English and sometimes a little bit in Finnish tells a lot about how education can actually change. Research and working higher education, I have to navigate theories and concepts, and sometimes my a very difficult academic language in my heart from since my first job as a teacher of English in Brazil. I have believed that we have to do as much as possible to support education at all places, right? Not just at schools. So being invited to talk to people in libraries, who work in libraries and do so much for the education of young people, but also adults and older people alike, it makes me really happy and proud, which is why I'm a little bit nervous, to be honest. So the reason why I'm giving you these little speech about education is because it's very difficult in the university, in academia, to sometimes have to make a decision between, do you want to teach or do you want to do research? I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's a kind of a classic dilemma that we have. And I deliberately chose to be more of a teacher than of a researcher, even though, of course, research and teaching, they go together, right? The same I can say about Sabine Harrer. Sabine is an Austrian colleague of mine. She now lives in Visby because she works at the University of Uppsala. But we met in Tampere when we were both working at the University of Tampere. And we immediately agreed that we have to do more in terms of producing materials that can be useful for education outside the university, outside schools, in different places, and so on. That's why Sabine and we wrote this book. In Finnish, Reilu, peli, haastamaan, peleissä, esiintyvä rasismi ja koloniaalisuus. Fair play, challenging racism and coloniality in games, because we thought that me, with an experience with more sort of theoretical and also lived experience with racism, and Sabine with her experience in game development and game studies, we could come together and create a book that could be useful both for people who play games and want to understand how racism plays out in the experiences of play, but also to teachers in schools, to people who work outside schools with different groups of people, and why not to people who work in libraries as well. So in a way, we felt that we could use our expertise to create a material that builds on life experiences, both as people coming from different countries. I'm from Brazil, like I said. I may have said, I don't remember anymore. Sabine is from Austria, and we both dealt with racism in different ways in the places we come from, especially in this case, but not just exclusively, but especially through playing, be it board games, be it video games, or be it playing on the street and interacting with other people. So we thought that we could make this book somehow a combination of those experiences with theories that we know, but at the same time making it a book that invites people to think about the problem, because that's one thing that we were thinking when we were writing the book. We don't want people to feel afraid of talking about racism. We don't want people to feel ashamed of what they talk about racism, or feel that they're talking about it, and that they can also do something about it, regardless of suffering from racism, like Black people like myself, or not, right? So all the time when we were writing this book, we were thinking, can anti-racism practice be somehow fun? Can it be fun? Because the idea of games is fun, right? Even though you have a history of games that are pedagogical and stuff, the idea is that the fact of play is involved in the experience, it is somehow fun. And we were thinking all the time, can we make something, can we do a kind of anti-racism that's fun? And by fun, I mean like, in Finnish it's tricky because you have the word hauska. So hauska can be fun and funny, right? What fun is like something that is enjoyable, but not funny, like not a joke, but actually something that engages people, that engages different kinds of senses of people, just like games do. So what I will show you today in this presentation is a little bit of what you can find in the book and how it can be useful, say in libraries, as a resource to organize activities, to do different types of workshops and different types of interactions with the people who come to the libraries where you work, in terms of understanding a little bit more about what racism means and how games can be useful to act in a ludic way, in a fun way, so to say, against this big problem that affects all of us directly or indirectly. I have just 2 slides, a lot of text, and after that there will be like just, you know, some images and some of the headings, the titles of the chapters in the book, and I will talk a little bit about them. If you have questions, of course, you can ask in the chat. You can also ask in Finnish. If I don't understand the question, Paulina will help me for sure. And I hope that even though this presentation is in English, that it's somehow useful for you. And about the book, if you're interested in checking the material, we have both the version in English and the version which we wrote in English, but we also have the version in Finnish because we published this book in partnership with KAVI, the Audiovisual Institute of Finland, and KAVI with the website pelikasvatus.fi published both the English and the Finnish version of the book. So it's being translated that it's certainly pedagogical environments, libraries, schools, beyond the university across Finland. So it's available for free, it's downloadable, and the link is this one that you see under the cover of the book in the slide. So yes, two slides with lots of, thank you, Paulina, for sharing on the chat. 2 slides with lots of text, right? One, in all of these slides, you will have the translation in Finnish, and I'm so sorry if the translation has mistakes, but then there is the original in English if you want to check if something in Finnish is confusing. And if you know English, then you can check what I meant by them. So the first one is not necessarily academic, but the second one is a concept that I think is important, which is the explanation of koloniaalisuus as an idea. But first, the next slide. Let me see here. So I will stop talking for a minute so you can read the slide in silence and in peace. And then I will explain why there is a photo of Nelson Mandela in a presentation about a game that talks about racism and coloniality. So yeah, please read the slide and I will continue in a minute. Assuming you have time to read this, and I won't like go through the text, I'll just explain the background to it. But I can send the slides to Paulina and Kai, and then they can share with you if you're interested. The reason why I share this slide, this message from Nelson Mandela, is because I've been working with racism and anti-racism for a while. And I think one of the things that usually come up is people make an argument against racism by saying, oh, but this is so stupid. We are all human beings. We are equal, etc., 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 which is true. But unfortunately, because of history, people learned that some people are somehow superior to others, right? So, for example, my existence as a Brazilian person only happened because Portuguese colonizers felt entitled and superior to go to Africa and enslave in partnership, of course, with different people, different opposing tribes in Africa, whatever. But they felt entitled that they could take people like my ancestors and drag them across an ocean for labor. And the justification for that they created was basically like, no, we can do this because these are not civilized people. These are not people like us, right? These are not human beings. These are almost like not full human beings like us. So this idea of superiority and inferiority, even though we are biologically equal, historically this idea was taught to us, all of us. And that's where racism comes from, right? It's kind of an idea that became so strong and so powerful with violence and so on, that it kind of ingrained in us, and it kind of still affects the way we live with each other today. So if this hating of the other, if the sense of superiority was taught, we can also taught the other way. We can also teach people to love instead of hate, to feel equal instead of superior, and so on and so forth. But it's a very hard work, right? Because if you think of the history, it's like at least 500 years of people thinking they are superior to black and brown bodies, you know, compared to the time we have now, which is very recent. Like the whole conversation about anti-racism is less than 100 years, I think. So there is still a lot of work to do, and I think that's why combining our belief in education with the sense of having to do something to contribute to destroying this idea of superiority and inferiority among human beings, that we created this book. So we are kind of like Mandela disciples in a way, like we're kind of trying to live his message in terms of building understanding of what racism means. In this case, specifically, how racism plays out in games and what we can do about games and with games to contribute to a world in which people actually respect each other as they are, without a sense of superiority and inferiority. Just to give you a historical understanding, that's why we put the term coloniality there, because coloniality helps us put racism as we experience today in historical context, right? So the next slide is a definition of what coloniality means. Again, it's a big chunk of text, but it's in Finnish and in English. You can read that. Like coloniality, when we talk about racism, and how we can deal with these as we go on. So the next slide, I will again stop for a minute. I saw that there was a question about what games could be racist and how. I can talk a little bit about that in a bit. But first, I will let you read and then I continue. Okay. The only reason why this is here is that so you know that there are lots of conversations about the history of ideas and how they shape our relationship as human beings. And coloniality is one very important one, because you don't need to be a colonial, you don't need to have a colonial history to reproduce colonial ideas. Which is something that I often hear also in the Nordic countries, that like, oh, but we were not like the Portuguese, we were not like the Dutch, we were not like the British. Yeah, but because of capitalism and the globalization of ideas, a lot of the racist ideas, for example, that affected my upbringing in Brazil, affect Black kids in Finland. So coloniality helps us understand how these ideas spread beyond colonial and post-colonial environments. So that's the only reason it's here. It's a conceptual debate, so people go back and forth with what they mean and so on. But for us, when we wrote the book, this was important to situate the book in this sort of historical context. Now about the book itself. These are the 5 chapters that we have. So the first is Racism and Coloniality, Racism ja koloniaalisuus, representation, playful interactions, leikilliset kohtamiset, race in the games industry, etnisuus peliteollisuudessa, ethnisuus or rotu, that's something like, because I know the word rotu, it can be very tough, but still we were wondering which would be the best word for this. And the next, fair play and anti-racist action. There was a question about what games can be racist, and we named some of them, right? But when we name some of these games, we also contextualize it so that it doesn't seem that, oh my God, I always play this game and am I racist? Like like I said, we're not blaming people for playing games that from different perspectives could feel like racist games, or games that have embedded in them racist ideas. We just really want people to have a tool so that they are able themselves to think about the games they play and how to identify and challenge racist ideas if they come across while playing. The book has illustrations by Varda Ahmed, who is a friend of ours who lives in Helsinki. I had to check the name so I wouldn't pronounce it wrong. Yeah, so we were talking a lot about this, like one example of game that can reproduce racist ideas. I saw that Annika was talking about Donkey Kong. We actually talk about Donkey Kong in one of the chapters because in Brazil, where I grew up, Donkey Kong became a nickname, a very derogatory nickname that white kids called black kids when the game came out. So it's not that the game is racist, but in the Brazilian context where monkey is used as a racist kind of slur, Donkey Kong became an instrument for racist ideas. And the problem at that context was we never had this conversation about how that could, how the game was used to call people names, like racist names, and what we could do in reaction, like game, you are racist against me, and so on. So because we never had that experience, a lot of my experience growing up in Brazil playing Donkey Kong is more of trauma than fun, because people were calling names to each other. So that's an example of a game that can be perceived as racist depending on the context. But yeah, so just to talk a little bit about the contents of the book before I stop. The first chapter is a little bit of this history that I was talking about, right? And I love this illustration by Varda because it is pretty much like she was able to translate into image into a drawing the kind of the feeling that we had when we wrote the book, which is in some games you still have these ghosts of the colonial period in which these ideas of inferiority and superiority were created. So the game that the kids are playing is following that very deep conversation about the African Star game, and we didn't want to claim that the game is racist, because there was a whole debate, as you know, about the game in Finland. But how does this game, from a certain perspective in a certain context, brings back all these ghosts of a very violent past in our history as humanity? So we have these conversations in the book. We talk about our personal experiences with different kinds of games. And when we talk about games in the book, we're not just talking about video games or anything, but we're talking about board games and also play, right? Like games that we play with each other on the streets and so on. So the first chapter is more like contextualizing historically what we mean by racism and coloniality in games. So I won't talk much about this now because I already talked a lot about this before, but I can answer questions if you have them. Then there is the question of representation. And when we talk about representation here, in a very short, kind of clear way, is basically like, we know that culture is really important, right? We know that's really like media, television, music. Every time we see people like us, we feel something. For instance, I remember in Brazil when Finnish people, my wife was in Rio actually, maybe 20 years ago, and there was a festival, like a film festival close to where I lived. And in the film festival, there was a Finnish movie. She was so excited, right? Oh, I'm seeing, she wanted to take me so I would listen to Finnish, like by other people for the first time and so on. We were starting to date, I think. So that kind of excitement came because she felt somehow part of what was happening in that event. And the same can be understood in terms of representation. It's like, who are usually the characters that you see in games? Like, who are the heroes? Who are the enemies? Who are the different groups of people? If the game has this representation of people, like Sabine, because Sabine is actually the game expert. She actually talks about sometimes that games with monsters, for example, they may not have the physical sort of skin representation of human beings, but they present some characters, some traits that can be in different contexts, in different circumstances, be somehow used to attack other people. So again, our point is not to say that games are or not racist, but how racist ideas appear in games, even if the games are not meant to have any kind of racist ideas at all, and how people who play the games experience these ideas as they play. The next point is the playful interactions, and the images that you see, they are a description of, it's kind of a cartoon can be used as catalysts for name calling, for racist, slurs and so on and so forth. When we wrote this book, we didn't think of this as a kind of a book that ends itself as you read, but actually a book that you can also use to think and talk about other experiences beyond the games or around the games, right? So when we talk about playful interactions, we're talking about how people reproduce racist ideas that they get by playing a certain game in a certain context and turn these into some kind of offense and some kind of aggression or violence against other people. So we're trying to present the games here as a catalyst for racist interactions and what we can do to avoid or to prevent these situations from happening. This is something that I also need to emphasize, like this book is not a theoretical book. It's a book that's very practical. So we actually wrote lots of workshop ideas, lots of, what can you do, right? If you ask, okay, but I understand that there are racist ideas in games. What can I do about it? We give you some ideas as our experience as educators with students of multiple ethnic and racial backgrounds. Then we kind of locate the game industry a little bit in this conversation as well. And we talk about, for example, how a lot of the games, they are idealized in predominantly white Western environments, but the physical existence of the games, the consoles and the microchips and so on, they are produced in very racialized environments, like with people working with underpay, under very bad conditions and so on. So that kind of gives this idea of how the production of games also reproduce racist ideas and the history of coloniality that I was talking about. And these chapter, for example, has exercises in which the people who read and the people who are organizing workshops can use to have the participants think like, okay, so we have this game here, we have this PlayStation here. Let's look at let's look at the tag. Where was it made? Why was it made in this place and not, for example, in Finland? How about the parts? And then if you have something that you can open and break apart, like this was made in a different place, why, and so on, and have these conversations, I think helps the students or the people participating understand a little bit better of the material historical background of gaming from this perspective. This is more like almost like an informative but also interactive chapter than not. And finally, the last chapter is basically like focused all on in what we can do, both as young people, adults, everybody involved, what we can do to think about the idea of fair play, in terms of, how can we make the experience of playing games fair and fun for everybody? How can we reduce the risk that racist ideas that might be importantly, how can we develop games that are deliberately meant for increasing the sense of human beings are equal and therefore should respect each other rather than the idea of superiority and inferiority. It's a very it's a chapter that suggests some ideas, but most importantly, what I think will be very important if you choose to work with this book and with these ideas in the libraries where you work, is to be creative as well, and most importantly of all, include different people, especially young people, in creating the activities themselves. Because as you probably know as well as I do, there is a new generation of Finnish people that are very proactive when it comes to acting against racism. Like I was just talking to a friend of mine who was very emotional in a tram in Helsinki the other day when somebody was drunk, said something racist to an older person, and the young people in the tram were very vocal against that person. They kind of went to support the lady. They were very sort of reactive, not in a violent way to what the person said, and so on. So involving especially young people in creating anti-racist understandings of game will probably make the experience of using this book for creating broader experiences of fair play even better. So yeah, this is what I have to say. Thank you for listening.